Hi, boys and girls. This is Ms. Kathy. I'm so happy you've joined me today for another story just for you. The 10 Commandments. It was a quiet morning. The sun was just lighting the sky as Pharaoh stepped past his guards and magicians to wash in the Nile River. Then a loud voice shattered the peace and quiet. "Pharaoh!" There were Moses and Aaron with another message from their God. "God says that since you will not let his people go, you must learn that he is the true God. I will strike the river with my walking stick, and the water will turn into blood." As soon as Aaron's stick hit the water turned red. The red color spread everywhere the water went. The fish died, and the whole river began to stink. Then Aaron waved his stick at the land, and all the water in the ponds and pools, even the water in buckets, turned to blood also. But Pharaoh's magicians could turn water into blood also, so he refused to let the Israelites go. For 7 days the river water was blood. Then Moses and Aaron spoke to Pharaoh again. "God says, 'Let my people go, or I will punish Egypt with frogs.'" But Pharaoh refused. So Aaron held his walking stick out over the river and the land. Suddenly frogs were everywhere, on the streets, in the houses, in people's beds, even in their ovens. Pharaoh's wise men used their tricks to bring out more frogs, but Pharaoh got tired of them quickly. "Pray and ask God to take away the frogs," he told Moses, "and I will let your people go and worship." But when all the frogs were dead and gone, Pharaoh changed his mind. He would not let God's people go. So God told Aaron to strike the dust on the ground with his stick. When he did, the dust all over Egypt turned into gnats. Clouds of these gnats pestered every person and every animal. The magicians tried to turn dust into gnats, but they could not. "God is doing this," they told Pharaoh, but Pharaoh would not listen to them or to Moses. Next, God sent swarms of biting flies. They were everywhere, tormenting everyone. Finally, Pharaoh said to Moses, "Go and worship your God, but stay in Egypt." "No," Moses answered, "we must go out into the desert to worship." Pharaoh agreed, so Moses prayed and God sent the flies away. Then Pharaoh changed his mind again and would not let God's people go. God sent Moses back to Pharaoh to say, "If you do not let my people go, I will punish you by sending a terrible disease on your farm animals, your horses and donkeys and camels and goats and sheep. But none of the animals that belong to the Israelites will get sick." So the next day, all of the farm animals in Egypt got sick and died, except for the Israelites' animals. Still, Pharaoh would not let God's people go. God told Moses, "Take a handful of ashes and throw them into the air." Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and threw the ashes. The wind scattered them across the land, and every person they touched got boils, ugly, painful sores on their skin. But Pharaoh still would not let God's people go. Moses warned Pharaoh again, "Tomorrow God will send a hailstorm, the worst hailstorm that Egypt has ever seen. Every animal and every person still outside will be killed." Many of the Egyptians who heard this brought their things inside. When the hail came, it stripped the limbs off the trees, destroyed the crops, and killed any person or animal that was outside. Pharaoh sent for Moses. "I was wrong," he said. "Ask your God to stop the hail. I will let your people go." But when the storm stopped, he changed his mind. God sent Moses to speak to Pharaoh and say, "If you refuse to let my people go, I will bring locusts to your land. There will be more locusts than anyone has ever seen before, and they will eat every green thing that is left." Pharaoh's officers didn't want to see any more punishments. They said, "Let the Israelites go worship their God before our whole country is ruined." So Pharaoh called for Moses and told him, "Okay, you can go and worship your God in the desert, but only the men can go. The women and children must stay here." Moses shook his head. "We must all go," he said quietly. "Never!" Pharaoh shouted. So Moses raised his stick, and an east wind began to blow. Before long, the sky was filled with clouds of locusts riding in on the wind. They covered the whole land and ate everything that was not destroyed by the hail. Quickly, Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron. "Please ask your God to stop this punishment. I will let your people go." Moses prayed, and God changed the wind. It came from the west and blew the locusts all the way to the Red Sea. But as soon as they were all gone, Pharaoh changed his mind again. God told Moses, "Raise your hand and all of Egypt will go dark, so dark that you can feel it." So Moses raised his hand, and for 3 days Egypt was completely dark. No one could go anywhere or do anything, but the Israelites had light where they lived. Finally, Pharaoh called Moses again. "Okay, you and your people can go, but you must leave all of your flocks and animals here." Moses shook his head. "We must take our animals also. We will need some of them as sacrifices when we worship." Now Pharaoh got really angry. "Then no one will leave," he shouted at Moses. "Get out of my sight. If I ever see your face again, I will have you killed." God had one more punishment for Egypt, and it was worse than all the others. He told Moses, "At midnight I will go through Egypt. At that time, every man, boy, and male animal that was born first in its family will die. It will be the worst thing that has ever happened in Egypt." Then God told Moses how the Israelites could keep their families safe. Even though Pharaoh had promised to kill Moses, Moses went back and gave him God's message. Pharaoh had 10 chances to let God's people go, but he would not. The 10 punishments were terrible, but God kept his people safe from the worst ones. It was a very scary time even for God's people, but they learned that they could trust him even when scary things were happening.
The story you have heard today is from the Shoebox Kids Bible Stories, written by Jerry D. Thomas and used with permission from the Pacific Press Publishing Association. If you're interested in any other books published by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, please visit AdventistBookCenter.com or call 1-800-765-6955.
This podcast is a production of the Carolina Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.